to the latest figures there. 5 people dead now, about 40 believed to be injured. Obviously, we'll continue to get updates throughout the day from authorities over there and also our counterparts at B-Sky B. But we'll have more now live because we've got terror expert and CEO of SAGE International, Dr. John Bruni, who joins us from our Adelaide studio. Thanks for your time today, Dr. Bruni. First of all, I suppose, interesting that the terror alert's not being increased, determined to go back to business. It seems as though this isn't likely at this stage, according to authorities, some sort of a spate of imminent attacks in the UK.
Yeah, look, I think that at the moment what we are witnessing is actually the actions of a lone wolf terrorist. So, unfortunately, this is the new wave of the future of terrorism. Terrorism, as we know, is adaptable. Technology is out there. It allows people to create their dark fantasies into reality. And yes, look, we're very thankful for the fact that it doesn't look likely that this is part of a coordinated assault on London.
And John Bruni, the resolute response from Theresa May and the fact, as Tom says, the security alert level stays where it is, it also reflects, doesn't it, the fact that this is a country and a government and a security apparatus that's had to deal with terror attacks going back many years to the IRA and the anarchist group, the Angry Brigade, back in the 70s and 80s.
Yes, indeed. One of the key differences, of course, is that Margaret Thatcher did have a very different way of dealing with terrorism. She, of course, wanted to suck the oxygen away from the issue of terrorism with regard to the IRA, and she did that rather successfully. Unfortunately, post 9/11, we've done, unfortunately, not such a great thing. We've kind of given the terrorists a free hit in terms of being front page news constantly, and this is something that I think is a bit of a problem for us, especially since the incidents like we've just witnessed in London tend to resonate in the internet, and unfortunately people take inspiration for this kind of act, and the likelihood of follow-up attacks in other capitals is quite likely. One of the things that we'd have to watch at the moment is the situation in France. France has also had a recent spate of terrorist incidents, coordinated ones, and we've got a very controversial election coming up in France next month. And I think that if terrorism were to visit French shores, it may very well give a bump up to presidential candidate Marine Le Pen.
So what's the realistic reaction then? Because you say, we are no longer sucking the oxygen out of it, but at the same time, these attacks are going on and the public would probably want to be, warned about them, knowing what's going on. So what do you think a realistic reaction, for example, from the media should be?
Look, I think that mainstream media, in spite of the fact that social media is taking off in a big way, mainstream media, of course, is where most people get their, the more credible media reportage from, right? So when people watch mainstream media, they feel as though they're getting the real news in spite of what President Trump may say about fake news. What we need to realise is that there is a responsibility for the protection of the citizens, and as there is a responsibility to report, it's making sure that we get the balance right. I don't think that any country has done that right now, especially in the West, because we seem to be putting the idea of putting forward information over and above the national security requirements of the communities which media outlets serve. So this is a debate that the media around the world, mainstream media, have to have in order to strike that balance.
Dr. Bruni, I just want to refer to something that Scotland Yard just said about the police officer who was killed in that attack. I might just add as well that the BBC is now reporting his name is Keith Palmer. He's a 48-year-old father and served as a police officer for 15 years. Scotland Yard confirmed that he wasn't carrying a firearm at the time of this attack. Do you think that an incident like this will force the UK to have a look at whether all police officers are armed? We know that they have introduced some armed officers in the past few months. Will this change how policing policy is carried out there?
Well, look, I think it would be a great shame if the UK loses its stoicism and follows the way of continental Europe, where most police forces are now turning into paramilitary forces, essentially. As things are, I think that there is certainly a likelihood that the UK will actually start following suit over a period of time, and we'll see more and more armed officers on the streets of London, yes.
And John Bruni, just to return to something we touched on a bit earlier, but the nature of the lone wolf attack, we've seen the security presence here at Parliament stepped up again today, according to the Federal Police. But the nature of this sort of individual, when they're driving a vehicle, using a vehicle as a weapon, there are no explosives, no guns. If this person hasn't really engaged with IS, for example, online, it's almost impossible to stop this sort of attack.
It is, and again, public expectation with regard to the counter-terrorism mission has to be couched in reality. In many ways, it's much easier for authorities to track known felons and known suspects that are part of a group. It's very, very different when you try to follow the goings-on of an individual who has no particular record and no history of of dealing with with terrorism. So in that sense, I think that yes, we're going to end up having to readjust the public and their expectation with regard to their safety going forward, because lone wolf attacks are the new wave of terrorism, and we need to be able to get on top of it, but we also need to be able to make sure that the public understand the reality of the difficult nature of rolling up the crazed individual in front of his computer.
And in terms of Australia and countering the threat, obviously we seem to have been quite successful in stopping a lot of these attacks before they happen. Not all of them, of course. Do you think it's simply a case of a smaller country further away from these types of battlegrounds? Is there a bit of luck and a bit of good planning at the same time?
Look, without putting too fine a point on it, I think yes, absolutely. I mean, Australia's distance from most of the controversies that take place in Europe and the Middle East actually serves us. The tyranny of distance does serve us, but also good policing, good intelligence also helps as well. So for us, it really is a mix of all things. And ultimately, yes, I think that we can continue the good fortune up until a point, but, the internet knows no national boundaries, and it's only a matter of time before, unfortunately, we see someone try to pull off a major stunt here in Australia. I mean, we've had Martin Square, we had the Burke Street massacre, but thankfully that wasn't linked to terrorism. But still, the modus operandi of the person who perpetrated that attack goes to show that a vehicle can be a very lethal weapon.
Dr. John Bruni, thanks for your time today on Sky News.
Thank you.